It's time for the Your Personal Bank Show with Ferenc Toth. In an era of chaos, confusion, and craziness, Ferenc is a voice for common sense. As a financial literacy educator, speaker, and entrepreneur, Ferenc cuts through the noise to help us understand how current events affect our money, economy, and our freedom. Now, here's Ferenc Toth.
Welcome to the Your Personal Bank Show. This is Ferenc, and I have a very special guest today. We have the Honorable David M. Walker. He's a former Comptroller General of the U.S. government and a former federal, or I should say, Social Security trustee, among other things. The first thing I want to do is, David, I want to welcome you to the show. Thank you for joining us.
Good to be with you, Ferenc.
Awesome. So you have a tremendous background on the fiscal side as a CPA and all that. A lot of people ask me as I was sharing with them, I'm going to be interviewing you, what is the U.S. Comptroller General?
Well, in English, it is the Auditor General of the United States, the Chief Accountability Officer of the United States, and the Chief Executive Officer of a legislative branch agency entitled the U.S. Government Accountability Office.
So you would be like the CFP, or the Chief Financial Officer of the U.S. government.
No, the CFO is in the Office of Management and Budget.
Okay.
The Treasury Department has a lot of responsibilities with regard to accounting, okay, as well as the different departments and agencies. I'm more like the Auditor General, okay? Some people say, I'm the top CPA, and I am a certified public accountant, but it's really more like the Auditor General. Believe me, if I was keeping the books and doing the finances, they'd be in a lot better shape than they are right now.
Well, from talking to you, I completely believe that. And you have over 40 years experience in the auditing or CPA field, if you want to call it. Arthur Andersen, among many other things. It's folks, his resume is very, very impressive. And so that's one of the reasons I wanted to have you join us on the show today. And again, thank you for doing so. David, you wrote a book recently. And why, I guess the first question I have is, why did you write the book?
Well, my family came to this country in the 1680s. I have ancestors who fought and died in the American Revolution. I'm, very concerned about the current state and future direction of our country. And therefore, I felt that it was important to impart some knowledge that I have and some potential solutions that the public supports to try to be able to diffuse our ticking debt bomb and solve other problems that we face right now, both domestically and internationally. And I self-published the book. My last book was a national bestseller. It was published by Random House. This one, I wanted to get it out quick, just to impart knowledge, so I self-published it. And for the record, the title is America in 2040, Still a Superpower, ? A Pathway to Success. And the shorthand answer to the question is yes, if we change course and follow the advice in the book, and maybe no if we don't.
I understand. So, David, from your perspective, what do you see as some of the biggest challenges or issues we have right now from a fiscal standpoint with our government and our country?
Well, the metrics that I really look at are threefold, the primary metrics. Number one, debt as a percentage of the economy. Not all debt's the same. Some debt is okay, but too much debt is not. Slows economic growth, individual opportunity, results in higher interest rates, lower employment opportunities, additional inflation. Secondly, what percentage of the budget is mandatory spending on autopilot where we've written a blank check? And thirdly, what percentage of the budget is interest for which you get nothing? On all three of those metrics, we're flashing red. We're at an all-time high on debt. We're at an all-time high on total liabilities and unfunded obligations. You hear about 35 trillion debt. That's the tip of the iceberg. The real number is 125 trillion, which counts civilian and military pensions, retiree health care, unfunded Social Security and Medicare obligations. Interest has already passed what we spend on the Defense Department. And when you count both tax preferences as well as direct spending, the Congress only controls about 15% of the annual spending, And by the way, we're running deficits of close to 2 trillion a year. And it took us almost 200 years to get to 1 trillion.
Yeah. So when I see those charts,
Other than that, everything's all right.
you're right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's mind-boggling when you see the charts. When you look at like the jet chart, for example, and you, like you said, you see it kind of go up, very slowly, and then in the last couple of decades, it just shoots up like a rocket and just keeps increasing in acceleration.
Well, and you ain't seen nothing yet, Ference, because the problem is not where we've been. It's not where we are. It's where we're headed. We're already too high. But
Right.
it's like a hockey stick. If you can envision a hockey stick, it's just getting ready to take off even more absent a change in course. And unfortunately, neither one of the major presidential candidates is making this a priority. And in addition to that, you mentioned Social Security. Neither one of the major presidential candidates is talking about reforming Social Security and Medicare, which is essential if you want to avoid major across the board automatic cuts in those programs in the case of Social Security, less than 10 years.
As you know, David, I interviewed about a month ago Sheila Weinberg, founder of Truth in Accounting, and we had a very long, extensive discussion about Social Security and the issues there. And she shared some information that, frankly, opened my eyes. And I get this question from my clients. Probably the most common question I get is, what do you think is going to happen if, like you said, they don't change course? What is going to happen? You were a former Social Security trustee. Give us some insight.
Well, first, the last time we reformed Social Security was 1983 in the so-called Greenspan Commission. And the reason that we reformed it in 1983 is because within a matter of months, the trust fund was going to go to zero. And when the trust fund goes to zero, according to current law, you must cut benefits across the board because you can only pay Social Security benefits from trust fund assets. The modern day equivalent of that is 2033. If we don't do anything, it's an across the board cut of about 20% and growing over time. That's not going to happen. That's not equitable. It's not politically feasible. You're not going to cut tens of millions of Americans, pensions overnight like that, especially when they're the ones that vote with the greatest percentage of any segment of the population. But we ought to be reforming it sooner rather than later because you have to make less changes, more time to plan, more transition time, etc. But unfortunately, the biggest deficit we have in this country is a leadership deficit. We don't have enough leaders that are willing to recognize reality and take on tough things until a crisis gives them cover to do it. And I think a lot of the things that are likely to happen are very similar to what happened in 1983. Raise the taxable wage-based cap, gradually raise the normal retirement age, change the formula to provide a greater replacement rate for people near the poverty level and less for upper middle and upper income individuals, but not make it a welfare program. Change the cost of living index to be more reflective of cost of living for seniors rather than the entire population because their basket of goods are very different. But we can reform it to make it solvent, sustainable, secure. But this time what we need to do is to make sure we consider demographics. They didn't do that in 1983. And when I was a trustee in 90 through 95, myself and my fellow public trustee blew the whistle to say the problem was not solved. Next time we need to solve it, hopefully indefinitely, not just for a 75-year cliff period.
I see. So there was a lot there that you shared. I like the part you mentioned with the demographics, bringing in the demographic aspect, not just for everyone. And there has been a lot of discussion with a lot of folks, are they going to, what age or maybe you qualify for it as folks coming into qualifying up, increasing the retirement age, things like that. These are all things that you would encourage and support, right?
Well, it depends upon how much, right? And what the conditions are. I mean, we have to find demographics or destiny. When I was born in 1951, there were 16 people working for every person drawing Social Security. Now it's about 3 to 1, and it's going to go down to 2 to 1 within the next 10 years. I think the normal retirement age right now is 67. It's scheduled to go to 67. I think you can raise it a couple of more years gradually over 20 years or so without having a disruptive effect, because after all, we're now in the knowledge age. We went from the agricultural age to the industrial age to the knowledge age. People are living longer. Not as many people have stressful occupations. They can work longer. Some cases they have to work longer because inflation and a variety of other factors. I think you can leave the 62 where it is, which means that you can get a benefit earlier. You just get less of a benefit if you get it earlier. Another alternative is to think about providing some modification for people in certain occupations where, based on the nature of the occupation, they really can't work as long. You know, I mean, my grandfather was a steel worker, and my other grandfather was a mine worker. Those are very taxing occupations. At the same point in time, they're a lot smaller percentage of the population than they used to be when they were there.
That's an interesting idea. That's something I've not heard anybody bring up. Like you said, base it on occupation.
Right.
That would help alleviate some of the, like you said, if you're in a more of a white collar, you know, low stress type of physical stress type job, maybe you have to wait longer to collect versus, like you said, a miner or something.
And what's interesting is during the Clinton administration, I worked with the Clinton administration when I was a partner with Arthur Andersen, after I'd been a trustee and before I was Comptroller General. And we were working on Social Security reforms. And that's one of the things. I had a conversation with the head of the AFL-CIO, and I said, well, maybe we can make some modification for certain occupations. You know, you got to be disciplined about that. You don't want to have adverse selection, but you can do that. And frankly,
what was the response? I mean, how did they feel about it?
He had thought about it. Thought it was an interesting idea. He thought it was an interesting idea. And frankly, we would have had Social Security reform in the Clinton administration, but for the Monica Lewinsky incident.
Politics got in the way.
Yeah, well, I don't know if you'd call that politics, but okay.
Well, you know what I'm saying. Well, David, folks, I'm going to encourage you to stay tuned with us because we've got David with us all day today on our show. And so stay tuned in the next segment. We've got a lot of great information. He's a tremendous wealth of information. And we are going to get into some more solutions that David has in terms of our fiscal situation with our country. And maybe some of these ideas can gain some ground and we can make some progress. So I strongly encourage you to stay tuned in the next segment. Don't miss it.
Stay tuned for more common sense from Ference. For more information, contact Ference at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show with Ference Toth. Want more information? Contact Ference at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. Now back to the show with Ference Toth.
Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show. This is Ference, and we have a very special guest today, David Walker. He's a former U.S. Comptroller General, former Social Security trustee, just truly a wealth of information. David recently has written a book called America in 2040, Still a Superpower, A Pathway to Success. Folks, I'm going to tell you, I read part of it already, and it is a tremendous read. It not only lays out, David, I love what you did. It lays out some of the problems, but a lot of the solutions. So first of all, David, thank you for joining us.
Good to be with you, Ference.
Awesome. Well, we were in the last segment. If you missed it, I'm going to encourage you to go to yourpersonalbank.com. You can listen to this or any of the previously recorded shows. But we were discussing a lot of things about some of the problems and solutions on Social Security. Again, David was a former Social Security trustee, so I don't know a better source to go to. But David, you mentioned another solution might be savings rates. Explain that, what you mean by that.
Right. First, I personally believe that we need to maintain Social Security as a defined benefit plan where you get a certain amount of money for life that's indexed for inflation. You have to keep in mind that our retirement income system is supposed to be Social Security is the foundation, but you, like a house, you can't live on a foundation. You need more in order to have a habitable dwelling. And those things are supposed to be private pensions or 401k type plans, defined contribution, and personal savings. Unfortunately, while our debt is exploding, not only with regard to government debt, but household debt, the savings rate is going down. As a result, I think in addition to reforming the base Social Security system to make it solvent, sustainable, secure as a defined benefit system, I think we need to deal with the savings gap. And therefore, to the extent that individuals don't have an alternative for an employer provided savings vehicle, that there would be an automatic savings mechanism that would somewhat mirror the Federal Thrift Savings Plan, which has been highly successful. It's the largest 401k plan for federal government employees. That's automatic payroll deduction, goes into a pooled account, limited investment options, very low expenses, very pooled investment options, if you will. And
well, David, that's the TSP plan you're referring to, correct?
That's correct. It's performed very well. Okay.
The largest 401k in the world.
Right. And I use the word automatic rather than mandatory because words matter. Okay. The problem is that when you give people an option, they live for today rather than trying to plan for a better tomorrow. Whether it's a politician, whether it's somebody in the midlife, or whether it's a teenager who's planning for the weekend, okay? So we need to recognize human nature as being what it is and adjust our systems to try to be able to help people help themselves create a better future.
Okay. So, yeah, that is one of the common complaints I hear about Social Security. You contribute to it, you're required to through payroll deduction or whatever, and the returns on it are abysmal. And if you could have invested it somehow, even like you said, even something moderately conservative, the returns will be double or more easy, double or triple.
Here's the key. All right.
Okay.
First, it's not a traditional pension arrangement. It's not a traditional insurance arrangement. It is a social insurance arrangement. Okay. It's based upon society as a whole rather than the individual. There are big transfer payments. You got to keep in mind there are people that came into this system that paid hardly anything and yet get the benefits. The wealthier you are, then the less return you get. Okay. But on the other hand, it is a guaranteed form of income for life. And that's something that, quite frankly, used to exist in the private sector in defined benefit pension plans, but they have largely disappeared, except for one sector of the economy, which is a monopoly and doesn't have to compete. And you'll probably guess it, it's called government.
Right. What do you say to those that, are against privatizing Social Security? You hear that all the time.
Well, first, President Bush 43 proposed converting Social Security from a defined benefit system to a defined contribution system, which many people called privatization. Okay. The problem is that after many public education and engagement efforts, the popularity of his proposal was less after those engagements than before he started. And the reason being is because he forgot about the second word in Social Security. It's not opportunity, it's security. And therefore, that's why I say the right answer is to reform the base defined benefit program to make it solvent, sustainable, secure, considering demographics and other factors, and then have a supplemental savings account that the individual would be able to control how it's invested, where it's invested, very low expenses, and get an enhanced benefit and a better rate of return, hopefully, over time.
So what you're saying is maybe a portion of it, you'd have an option, you could get that better return. Would you want it to be an option or part of it? What do you think?
For example, right now, you pay 6.2%, up to a cap for Social Security, both the individual and the employer. That cap is likely to be raised significantly as part of the next Social Security reform, as it was in 1983. But on top of that, a reformed defined benefit system, an automatic payroll deduction into an individual account let's say 3% of pay, okay,
Mhm.
that the individual would control and invest in a limited number of options. So it would be a supplement, not a substitute, and it would be automatic unless you have an employer-sponsored plan that that gives you at least that much in your account. But on the other hand, if you have an employer-sponsored plan, you might be able to make it an option up to a level for individuals. But for people who don't have an employer-sponsored plan or aren't saving a minimum amount, it would be automatic.
So if I understand you correctly, you're basically saying keep roughly half of the money in a current Social Security system like it is, and the other half in a option that would allow for greater return potentially.
No.
No. Okay, then I misunderstood.
Keep all of the payroll tax money in the Social Security system, reform it to make it solvent, sustainable, secure, base defined benefit for life, indexed to inflation. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then have a supplemental savings account, an additional 3% on top. Okay. That you would control. It would be an account in your name, limited investment options, low expenses, like the Federal Thrift Savings Plan. So it's a
Okay, got it.
A hybrid arrangement.
What would you say to the person that says, putting this money into the Social Security system, and it's not, obviously it potentially is going to be running out of the surplus soon. Can we trust the how can we fix it so we can trust the politicians or whoever to not screw it up in the future?
Well, let's just say that the politicians, in my opinion, will not allow Social Security's trust fund to go to zero, where tens of millions of Americans would have their benefits cut significantly. That is just not equitable. It is not politically feasible. It's not going to happen. But we need to deal with it sooner rather than later. The bigger problem, quite frankly, Ference, is not the Social Security system. It's the fact that politicians have become addicted to spending, deficits, and debt. The debt ceiling has been a dismal failure. Statutory approaches to try to constrain the growth of government and out-of-control spending have not worked. And therefore, we need a constitutional amendment that will limit how much debt as a percentage of the economy we can take on absent extraordinary circumstances. We need to have a mechanism that will stand the test of time, that binds current and future Congresses, that will force them to make tough choices with regard to spending and revenues. Because right now, they're mortgaging the future of our country and our kids at record rates with relative impunity. And that can't be allowed. It's irresponsible, it's unethical, it's immoral, and it must stop.
I agree with you 100% on that. And that's something I've been sharing on the show repeatedly, that the debt is going to destroy this country. Even the Pentagon says it's a national security issue.
Well, one of my good friends, who also endorsed the book, is Admiral Mike Mullen, who was chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. In 2007, I said on 60 Minutes that the greatest threat to our future was our fiscal irresponsibility. In 2010, Admiral Mullen said the greatest threat to our national security is our out-of-control spending and debt. And there are a number of others who have echoed that, including former Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Bill Owens, who wrote the foreword for the book, because the book is about economic security and national security, security broadly defined.
And I know some people, they don't want to, focus on economics and money because that can be a kind of a boring topic for many people. But folks, I'm going to strongly encourage you to read this book, American 2040, Still a Superpower, Pathway to Success, David Walker. It's a great book in terms of, like you said, challenging the failed modern monetary theory, which I'm going to encourage you to stay tuned in the next segment. I'm going to ask him some questions about that, why he feels it's that way, the irresponsibility of our fiscal policy, the irrational. It's like I used to say, it's like a drunk. It used to say it was like a drunken sailor. our government spent money like your drunken sailor. But then I said, that's offensive to drunken sailors. It's like a whole fleet of them, right?
Right,
And
especially since I was a professor at the Naval Academy. So,
exactly, exactly. But folks, I'm gonna really encourage you to check out the book and stay tuned in the next segment because we're gonna get into some more issues and some of the solutions that David has proposed in the book, America in 2040. So stay tuned, don't miss it. This is some powerful information that not only you should know, but share it with your friends and everybody else you know, because if we want to stay a superpower, we've got to get our financial house in order. That's the bottom line. So stay tuned, don't miss it.
Stay tuned for more common sense from Ference. For more information, contact Ference at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show with Ference Toth. Want more information? Contact Ference at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. Now back to the show with Ference Toth.
Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show. This is Ference, and we have an amazing guest with us, David Walker. He is former U.S. Comptroller General. Basically, that's the head CPA or auditor of the United States government, folks. He also was a former trustee of the Social Security trustee. So David has a tremendous amount of background and wealth of knowledge. David, thank you for joining us on the show today.
Good to be with you, Ference.
Awesome. And of course, before I forget, he wrote a book recently. I'm going to encourage you to check it out and read. It's called America in 2040, Still a Superpower, A Pathway to Success. There's a lot of tremendous information in there, David. I really appreciate you writing this book. The thing that we were discussing in the last segment that I thought was very important is you started discussing the debt, the fiscal irresponsibility. Obviously, a lot of people ask me this all the time. The debt is becoming a bigger and bigger problem, and where it's headed is the biggest problem, as you stated earlier. In your opinion, what do you think is going to happen? How should people deal with this?
Well, first, we need to understand a little background. You mentioned modern monetary theory.
Yes.
That is a flawed and failed macroeconomic theory that was advocated by Bernie Sanders, chief economist. And you wonder why Bernie never wanted to answer the question of how much was that going to cost, because he didn't care how much it was going to cost, because he believed in the modern monetary theory. Let me explain what it is.
Okay.
That's a theory that says that deficits and debt don't matter as long as you can borrow in your own reserve currency, unless and until you have excess inflation. Well, first, it's contrary to history. It's contrary to long-established economic history. It's based upon a flawed comparison to Japan. And guess what? It generated excess inflation because when one party controlled the Senate, the House, and the White House in 2001 and 2002, they aggressively pursued the modern monetary theory. Spending was out of control, all right? That ended up resulting in 9.1% inflation in June of 2022. It's come down now to about 3.4, which is still higher than what our target needs to be.
Well, that's if you believe the government numbers too, because I've discussed a lot about how they actually measure inflation.
Well, what's in and what's out, and
right.
And quite frankly, some of the things of the out are the things that are absolutely essential for daily living.
Well, they just took coffee out last month, for example, because it had gone up too much.
Well, they try to take out food and energy.
Right.
All right. Can you live without food and energy? I don't think so. Okay.
Right.
But in any event, so yeah, for certain things, the inflation's much worse than the average, if you will. But my point is, and so what happened is that theory was followed. It's flawed. It's failed. It needs to be put in the dustbin of history. But now we have to recognize that our politicians, are addicted to spending and deficits and debt. It's one thing if you run deficits and accumulate debt when you're at war, when you have a serious recession or a major national emergency, but we're getting to the point where we're running large deficits and debt on an annual basis when the economy is growing, when we're not at war, when we don't face a major national emergency. That's just irresponsible. And so that's why I'm saying, we need two things to deal with this. First, a constitutional amendment that will force Congress to be able to make the tough choices that will get us down to a reasonable and sustainable debt to GDP number within 10 to 15 years, because it's too high now, and we're projected to go a lot higher. And secondly, we need a fiscal commission that will engage the American people with the facts, the truth, the tough choices, listen to what they have to say, make a package of recommendations, guaranteed up or down vote in Congress, with everything on the table, but not everything's equal. Everything on the table, but not everything's equal. The problem is primarily a spending problem, but we're not going to be able to solve it just with spending cuts. We're going to need some additional revenues. Question is, how do you get that in a way that's pro-growth, that doesn't undercut our competitive posture? The good news is I got 77 to 97% support for a specific goal, principles and values, and illustrative reforms to accomplish that objective. And they're all in the book.
Do you mind giving us one or two of them, for example?
Sure. Well, okay. I've talked to you about the Commission on the Debt. We've talked about Social Security. Let's talk about taxes for a second, okay?
All right.
There are a lot of falsehoods out there. All right. First, not all tax cuts stimulate the economy. Very few tax cuts pay for themselves. Let me clarify what I mean by that. Okay. Just because you have more revenues after the tax cut than before the tax cut doesn't mean you were successful, because it's a percentage of GDP that matters. Just like spending on revenues, what percentage of GDP are you talking about? Okay. By definition, your taxes are going to go up if people make more money and you have inflation. You have bracket creep. So the mere fact that the gross amount of revenues goes up doesn't mean that the tax cut pay for themselves. Okay. You want a tax system that is as simple as possible. We fail on that one. Okay. That is as fair as possible. We fail on that one. Okay. That is internationally competitive. We're better after the last reforms than we were, and we need to stay that way. Okay. And that is administrable. Okay. And enforceable. We don't have that right now. Okay. So one of the things we're going to have to do is we're going to have to step back and recognize several things. First, spending as a percentage of GDP is skyrocketed. Revenues as a percentage of GDP are below average right now, post-World War II. Okay?
Would you, from a tax standpoint, would you support like a flat tax or a national sales tax or something along that line?
Well, let's talk about what the public supported, okay. Rather than I would support, because
all right.
The important thing about the book. The book talks about things that the public supported, okay? The public believes that we ought to get rid of a lot of deductions, exemptions, credits, and exclusions, with a few key exceptions, all right, to make it as simple as possible, to promote compliance and understanding with the tax law, to keep rates as low as possible, okay? In addition, the public believes that you can't have a system where 43% of tax filers pay zero, which is what we have right now.
We should have skin in the game.
Got to have some skin. Okay. We need a progressive tax system. It needs to be more progressive than it is today, but you can't have that many that don't have skin in the game. By the way, 20% of tax filers not only don't pay any income tax, they get money back for refundable tax credits, like the earned income tax credit, where there's a lot of fraud associated with that, by the way. All right. So eliminate a lot of deductions, exemptions, credits, and exclusions. I can give you a few examples of ones that you wouldn't eliminate. Okay. Keep the rates as low as possible. If you can get the top rate down to 28%, then eliminate the tax difference between capital gains and ordinary income. All right. Already, when people are getting income through capital gains, which is where the wealthy people get their money, they don't get it on wages. Okay.
Of course.
They don't have to pay social insurance taxes on that. So they're getting a benefit by having it through capital gains or if you will, rather than earned income. We need to stay competitive on the corporate side because we're competing on a global basis.
Also, corporations don't really pay taxes. The end consumer does, right?
From an economic sense, they don't.
Right.
In form, they do. In substance, they don't.
Right. They just raise their prices. If their taxes go up, they raise their price.
Arguably, you could say get rid of the corporate tax, but politically, that's not feasible. At the same point in time, there's several things you have to keep in mind. One, global corporations can move.
Right.
And therefore, your tax system has to be competitive globally. The public said take corporate tax rates down to 25%. The last one took it down to 21. 25 probably would have been adequate. Okay. Again, also streamline, simplify the tax code there. The other thing is that why do we have double taxation of dividends? All right. I mean, the public supported give a deduction to the corporation for dividends distributed. Why? What would that do? It would encourage them to invest for growth or distribute so that individuals can decide what they want to do with the money. Right now, we have trillions of dollars that are being retained by corporations that aren't being invested for growth and aren't being distributed to shareholders. That doesn't make any sense. And so, bottom line, we need to make it simpler, fairer, more competitive. We need to generate higher percentage of revenues as a percentage of GDP. We're below average now. It needs to be higher. But the biggest problem is, how are we going to reduce projected spending? Because the problem is primarily a spending problem. At the same point in time, those who tell you we can grow our way out of this problem would fail math.
Hear that frequently.
It doesn't come close to working. Do we need more pro-growth policies?
Sure.
Absolutely, positively, yes. Because if you grow the denominator faster than the numerator in debt to GDP, you're making progress, even if the numerator is going up. And that's what we did after World War II. But the world's a very different place overall and for the United States today and going forward than it was at the end of World War II.
It seems to me too here, David, there's a lot of fiscal education or lack of fiscal education out there, particularly with the public, and that needs to be addressed before we could probably accomplish some of these things.
Well, one of the things I also say in the book is I think there are two courses that should be mandatory before somebody can graduate from high school. You need to have financial literacy, mandatory financial literacy, and mandatory civic responsibility. The absence of requiring those two things is contributing mightily to our dysfunctionality.
Absolutely. And I'm going to encourage you folks to stay tuned in the last segment. We got David with us again. I want to discuss a little bit more about this financial literacy issue because it's close to my heart. Many of you know I used to teach a college certified financial literacy course. So it is a big problem. And unfortunately, part of the problem is some people politically benefit from a lack of fiscal literacy. So stay tuned in the next segment. We're going to share some more on that and David's book, America in 2040, Still a Superpower, A Pathway to Success. In the last segment, do not miss it.
Stay tuned for more common sense from Ference. For more information, contact Ference at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show with Ference Toth. Want more information? Contact Ference at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. Now back to the show with Ference Toth.
Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show. This is Ference, and we have a tremendous guest with us today, David Walker. He's a former U.S. Comptroller General, basically the head CPA of the U.S. government, former Social Security trustee, over 40 years of experience in CPA and the financial world. Tremendous background. He's written a book recently called America in 2040, Still a Superpower, A Pathway to Success. Highly encourage you to read it. David, thank you for joining us on this show.
Good to be with you, Ference.
Awesome. So we've been discussing some of the solutions. I mean, we've discussed a lot of the problems of fiscal irresponsibility with our federal government and Social Security and all these things are going on. We've started to discuss some of the solutions. You also were wanting to mention healthcare and defense. So what are the issues there that you see and solutions?
Well, first, the fastest growing expense, as we talked in an earlier segment, is interest, for which we get nothing.
Right.
Second fastest growing expense is healthcare. The United States spends far more of its economy on healthcare than any other industrialized nation, and yet we get below average outcomes. Infant mortality, life expectancy, hospital error rates being some examples. We have to step back and recognize that the government has promised too much, subsidized too many, and yet in some cases we're not meeting basic needs. And so one of the questions that I asked, the representative groups of voters and got their feedback on for the book was, should we have a conversation about understanding the difference between broad-based societal needs and unlimited individual wants? Because right now, everybody wants as much as they can get as long as somebody else pays for it. But unfortunately, right now, we're not paying for it. We're charging it to the credit card, borrowing from foreign nations, and sending the bill to our kids, grandkids, and future generations of Americans, okay? So, and one of the concepts we talked about was, should there be a universal health system, all ages, that cover two things: preventative and wellness, because it's in our broad-based societal need for everybody to have that, and catastrophic, unexpected, financial,
the big things.
Big things because of accident or illness. And the number one cause of bankruptcy in the United States is healthcare costs, right?
Right.
And then in the middle could be covered by employers, by industries, by unions, whatever. In other words, let's make sure that society covers the things that we really, really need.
Yeah, private insurance could handle the middle.
And they can handle the middle, right? And there are a number of things we need to do to pay more for outcomes rather than activities. There are things we need to do in the tax code. Believe it or not, one of the biggest tax incentives in the tax code is the fact that individuals don't have to pay income tax or payroll tax on employer-provided and paid health care, which disassociates people from the true cost of healthcare, which fuels healthcare cost inflation, which results in additional deficits and debt burdens. So, I mean, some of our systems just don't make sense. So there are some very dramatic reform concepts that are outlined in the book, as well as some more traditional ones with regard to, co-pays and payment systems and things of that nature. Now, on defense, if you look at the defense budget, it's over $800 billion. And people say, well, gee, we spend as much as the next 15 nations combined on defense. Well, that's a bogus number because, let's take China as an example, okay? Purchasing power in China is much greater than the United States. You can purchase a lot more for a dollar equivalent in China than you can here. Secondly, a vast majority of the defense industrial complex in China is controlled by the government. Thirdly, they don't have the same type of labor laws and environmental laws. And fourthly, they have a conscription. They don't pay their military very much. I mean, it's like when we used to have the draft, if you will, right? We have an all-volunteer army. It is incredibly expensive. And then if you look at the data, you'll see that the so-called tail, which is the overhead associated with the Defense Department, as compared to the tooth, which is the warfighting capability, the tail has gone up dramatically, and the tooth is flat to down. So we need to have a bureaucracy brack, way too much bureaucracy, not just in the Defense Department, but it's particularly evident there. We're also going to have to rationalize our weapon systems based upon current and future threats and how warfare has changed. For example, you now have total visibility above the surface of the water. People can see everything. Many more things are going to have to be done by unmanned systems, than what we have right now. And so the book has a lot of ideas on what are the things we need to do to rebalance with regard to how much we're spending on the tooth versus the tail, and then what are some of the changes we need to make with regard to our strategy and the kinds of weapon systems and facilities that we have to recognize what's likely to happen in the future rather than just building on what has happened in the past.
David, I agree with what you're saying, and I'm pro, strong defense. I served in the Army myself. But one of the issues I have that's not paid attention to, I'd sure like to see the Pentagon actually balance their budget, not say, hey, we lost $1 trillion or $2 trillion here, we don't know where it is.
Well, the Marine Corps just got an opinion on their financial statements.
Okay.
They got one before and they got pulled back, but hopefully this one will stick. But you're right to say that the Defense Department is the only major department in the government that has not been able to withstand an independent financial statement audit.
That's last 5 years, I think. I believe
they've been trying for over 20 years.
Okay.
They're zero for 20 plus. Okay.
Okay. Well, that's not that needs to be cleaned up.
It does, and they're spending a lot of time and money on trying to get that done. But it's not just about getting the opinion; it's being able to have timely, accurate, useful information to make decisions on a day-to-day basis. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
If you had modern and integrated information systems, if you had solid internal controls, it wouldn't be difficult to get an opinion on your financial statements. The problem is they don't have those things, and they're trying to make up for lost time to put them in place. Congratulations to the Marine Corps for getting that done, and that's the beginning or the beachhead of hopefully what will ultimately result in victory.
Good for them. Absolutely. So you've written this book. You've shared with us why. What would you like to see have happen? What's a best case scenario you envision going forward?
But here's my frustration.
All right.
My frustration is the biggest deficit that we have in Washington is a leadership deficit. The last president that we had who was focused on fiscal responsibility was Bill Clinton. Things have really gotten out of control after 2003. I explain all of that in the book as to why. That's the key date.
Mm-hmm.
There's not a party of fiscal responsibility anymore. Okay.
Right.
One party is addicted to tax cuts. The other party is addicted to spending increases. The combination of those two makes things much worse because you get the compounding effect. So we need a president who will make this a priority. And so far, neither one of the major presidential candidates have spent enough time on this. We also need one who will end up providing leadership on needed Social Security and Medicare reforms, which neither one has done that yet.
Well, they call that the third rail, right? Politics.
But the people are way ahead of the politicians. They understand we can't continue to do what we're doing. They're willing sometimes, they need leadership. And we need major citizen education engagement effort. And that's why I come back to what I said. Two things. In addition to presidential leadership, you have to have a fiscal sustainability commission that's statutory, and you have to have a constitutional amendment that limits how much debt is a percentage of the economy.
Is there much of an effort on that? I like the constitutional amendment idea.
Let me tell you
what's happening there.
There's two ways to get a constitutional amendment.
Right.
2/3 of the House, 2/3 of the Senate pass something, Senate of the states, 3/4 ratify. We've gotten 27 amendments. That's how they've all come. The founders were very bright people. They realized that Washington might become so out of touch and out of control, or there could be certain issues where they had a conflict of interest, like spending, debt, term limits, campaign finance, that the states should have the right to call a convention of states to propose one or more amendments if the Congress failed to act. Here's what's shocking. If 2/3 of the states file an application to the Congress for such a convention, for one or more things, the Congress shall call a convention. I'm part of a small group that found out that in 1979, 39 states had done that. 30 of fiscal responsibility. In 83, 40 states, 32 fiscal response, and Congress failed to act. So now we're working with several attorney generals to get those attorney generals, state attorney generals, to sue the Congress if they don't call the convention or otherwise propose their own amendment.
Now, David, I understand where you're coming from, but the one fear is the last time we had a constitutional convention, of course, they threw out the old government, created the Constitution. The founders were a bunch of bright people. I don't know if I would trust the people today.
Here's the difference. Here's the difference.
All right.
You're talking about the Articles of Confederation.
Right.
I'm talking about the U.S. Constitution.
Okay.
In the U.S. Constitution, there's Article 5.
Right.
Article 5 makes it very clear that this is not a convention to rewrite the Constitution.
Okay.
It's a convention to propose one or more amendments. The number one argument against it is runaway, that it ends up into certain things, Second Amendment, First Amendment, whatever.
Right.
We've dealt with that because a majority of the applications that existed in 79 and 83 were for fiscal responsibility only. State conventions are one state, one vote. So that means that the majority of the states have already said that we only want to talk about fiscal responsibility, and therefore we can avoid a runaway convention. We need to get this done because if you don't put your finances in order, believe me, everybody's going to suffer to differing degrees over time. And the answer to the question on the cover of the book will be no if we don't put our finances in order.
Right. And unfortunately, I think a lot of people think it's going to be down the road a ways. I keep saying I think it's going to be sooner than you probably realize.
I think within 10 years.
Okay.
We already have alignments against U.S. interests trying to move away from the dollar. Okay.
Right.
We have BRICS Plus now. We have several arrangements where people are being able to, to purchase things in other currencies or basket of currencies rather than the dollar. The warning shots have been fired.
David, thank you for joining us today. That was tremendous amount of information. Folks, if you want more information, get David's book, America in 2040, Still a Superpower, A Pathway to Success. Again, thank you for joining us. That was awesome. I hope we get a chance to talk to you again at some point in the future.
Thanks. And if people want to find out more, go to american2040.com.
Perfect. American2040.com. As always, stay tuned to the Your Personal Bank Show next week. And as long as it's on our money, in God we trust.
Listen Tuesdays at noon and Saturdays at 1 to the Your Personal Bank Show for more information. Contact Ference at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. This show is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information. The presenter and guests of this program do not engage in legal, accounting, or tax advice. Professional advice regarding your situation should be sought if required. Some products discussed may have limitations and not be available in all states. Excessive unpaid loans may affect performance. Distributions may become taxable if not managed properly. Replacements may not be suitable for everyone. There may be charges when replacing coverage. Dividend rates and bank line of credit rates may change. For current rates, contact Ference at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. Again, that's 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com.